Hi again folks, and welcome to the second build of day 3 of Special Projects pack number 9. This one for the keen eye and for the Special Projects fan from before Special Projects was even a pack-based thing. You might recognise this one because of course I already did a Ferrari F8XX, a fictional build in the style of the XX program. Of course, it was a pretty popular build in terms of how people received it. I was very proud of how it looked as well. And even as far as back then, I always kind of had the rough idea of making an Evoluzione version. Evoluzione, I guess it would be called in Italian, I think. Or a F8XX Evo for short. And I wanted to give it a slightly different coloration, slightly different aero package, maybe a slight difference in horsepower and weight. Not something that would be a night and day difference because that car was already 850 horsepower and 1175 kilos. So it was already pretty rapid, to say the least. But I wanted to see, could we make it a little bit quicker without going crazy on the numbers? So I'm actually not going to run through all of the parts in this video because most of them are the same as in that original build. So what I'm going to do is put a link in the description for those who didn't already build an F8XX. If you did already build one, you could turn it into this car. But then if you haven't built it at all, then combine the two together and you're ready to go. So of course, I've put a link to this livery down in the description as well. If you're curious about the colour, I wanted to choose something a little bit different and a little bit weird. So I've actually gone for prune, which is one of the more obscure Ferrari colours, if I recall correctly. But I actually kind of love it because it's a super dark colour. It's actually darker than some of the blacks in the game. It's a really cool looking colour, especially with the matte effect on the roof as well. As you can see, I have changed the rear aero, so it has the larger spoiler instead of the ducktail. That was one of the earliest things that I knew I was going to do on the build. I wanted to, make it more distinct visually. So of course that does come with the design if you download it from the, library. And that does incidentally allow it to have more downforce as well. So as far as the tuning side, you can see the improvements we've made. I decided to keep it still fairly realistic. I don't want to go crazy. If you compare the actual Evo versions to the normal XX cars, they don't go too crazy in terms of increases, especially if you go back to the FXX itself. So for this one, I've increased the power from 850 to 886. And I've dropped the weight by about 25 kilos, from 1175 to 1150. So it's still pretty believable, but with more downforce and a couple of adjustments here and there. Probably the most notable change, though, is the type of turbo, because originally it had a low range. Now it's got a mid-range, and of course that changes a car's personality and its usefulness on different tracks by quite a lot. So as far as the setup itself, if you compare this to the older one, you'll notice a few smaller changes. For the ride height, I've got 90 and 100. For the anti-roll, it's pretty high, up on 8. 38 and 44 for the dampers, 3.85 for the springs. Pretty hefty on the camber, race car style, 3 degrees. As far as the toe, I've towed out 0.10 on the front, and as you can see, towed in 0.20 on the rear. As far as the diff, we've got 15 and 30 on both acceleration and deceleration. As far as the transmission, I don't think I've changed that one. I think it was already on 360 kilometers an hour. That is already good enough for this car to get over 220 miles an hour in 7th gear. So it's not a speed build anyway. It is very high downforce. It's a circuit car, so you can, you can change that if you want to, basically. But again, I wanted it to feel kind of appropriate to the car. As far as the ballast, of course, we dropped that a little bit to 113, still all the way to the front, just to give it a bit closer to a 50-50 split. The power restrictors are untouched. Downforce is higher on the rear because of that larger wing instead of the ducktail, so of course that does make a difference. As I said, the medium RPM is what I've got now instead of the low range. That does change the car's performance quite drastically. And then for the anti-lag, that is still turned on strong. And for the other stuff here, I believe I did change 1 or 2 other things as well. I don't recall exactly what they were off the top of my head. I think one of them might have been the racing crankshaft, but I could be mistaken, which is why I said compare it to that older video and you'll be able to see. And I think one of the things I did do as well might have been the additional stage of weight reduction. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I did do that. The level 5, I think it is, the extreme one, because back when I built the first one, we didn't have access to that. That was back in the dark days where you had to, the dumbass method of winning everything from a wheel spin, so thankfully they got rid of that. So that's it for the build. Still under 800 points though, which is quite modest for a car with those kind of numbers. So of course what you want to see is, when we take it out to Monza, what can it do in practice, and crucially, how does it compare to the already pretty damn quick F8XX that I built before? Well, this one, of course, is going to be quicker. That already goes without saying. The question is how much quicker. That was what I was very curious to find out, because slight increase in horsepower, slight drop in weight, slight improvement in downforce. Is the lap time only going to be a slight improvement? Well, of course, I took it to Monza to do that direct comparison, and as it turns out, I compared it to the lap that I did in that other Special Projects video. That was a 1:33.6 lap. In this car, it's a 1:32.2. So just under a second and a half quicker, which of course is not the biggest difference in the world, but to me, I'm actually pretty happy with that because of two things really. One, how quick the car already was, and two, that feels quite realistic to me. Like, I feel in real life an Evo probably isn't like 10 seconds quicker than a normal version. It probably would be a couple of seconds. So to me, that feels quite accurate to what this car should be like. I don't think the looks will necessarily be for everyone. Prune is a very specific and probably quite odd choice of colour. I also wanted it to have a little bit of like a test car kind of look to it with that darker colour, like the muted tone. Whereas the older one I think is definitely a prettier car. And I also did that one in, of course, bright yellow, bright red and blue. It looks fantastic in all three, so if you do decide to use this one, I hope you have a ton of fun with it. You could definitely use it for some events as well, maybe the 800 point level. And of course, if you want to check out the older one, like I said, I put a link in the description to that one as well. So check them both out. I could definitely see some people preferring the slightly slower one. It has more of a kind of character to it, whereas this one's just more focused, which is the whole point. But of course, check out the builds which I've already done in pack number 9 this week. Stick around for the couple of days already that's left for the other ones as well. And until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, thanks for watching.